Mr Bridewell Goes to War is a short film in the style of a silent movie from 1914. It has a scratchy, crackling picture and is in black and white. Instead of speech, it uses captions to convey the words of the characters.
Equal Lives and ERMCIC present Mr Bridewell Goes to War, a film looking at disability in World War I. It is 1914 and the Bridewell family are at home.
We see Mr and Mrs Bridewell sitting at a table in their ornate house. They are playing dominoes with their two daughters. They look like a happy family enjoying each other's company.
As they played, war broke out. In the local shop.
The scene has changed to show a weighing scale and weights against shelves of food tins. The shopkeeper holds up the newspaper which states The Times War. He is shocked and holds his hand to his head. Mrs Bridewell and a friend are next to him. He hands the paper to her.
Mrs Bridewell learns the fateful news.
She starts to cry, thinking of war. Her friend too is upset. Next, we see a poster of Lord Kitchener stating, "Britons, your country needs you." The poster is on a wall in a street.
Mr Bridewell agrees with Kitchener's call.
We see people passing in the street as Mr Bridewell walks up to the poster and, reading it, agrees. He turns, and as he does, a soldier's hat appears on his head, indicating his intention to join the army.
Mr Bridewell heads home to tell his family the news.
Mrs Bridewell and the two daughters are sitting by the fireside as Mr Bridewell enters and stands in front of them.
"And I am going to fight for king and country,"
he exclaims. His wife starts crying at thought of him leaving the family. She reaches out to him.
"Joseph, don't leave the family,"
she says. The daughters hold his hand.
"Daddy, it's dangerous in war,"
they say. They are very upset for him.
"Come back safely,"
they add, crying. We see them all together before the picture fades to black.
Mr Bridewell is sent to fight in France.
Through the dark and flashes of light, we see a pair of army boots trudging through a field. Explosions can be heard as the boots make their uncertain way across the terrain. Lit by explosion flashes, we see Mr Bridewell in army uniform with his hat and a gun, firing at the enemy. Many explosions and gunfire illuminate the scene. Eventually, smoke and gas overcome him as he collapses.
Shell-shocked and wounded.
We see a photograph in a frame of Mr Bridewell when he was first sent to Paris.
Mr Bridewell returns to his family.
Mrs Bridewell turns to see him at the doorway.
"Joseph, you have returned,"
she exclaims. He stands in front of his daughters, who notice he has lost his right arm. He doesn't seem himself.
"What has happened to you?"
the daughters ask sadly. Mrs Bridewell looks mournful. She worries about how the family can help him.
Nurses treat his trench foot.
Mr Bridewell is in a hospital. He is covered in a blanket and having his brow wiped by a nurse. Another nurse walks in with a sore. Trench foot was a condition soldiers suffered from where their feet, being stuck in mud and mess all day, slowly rotted. She begins to saw at his foot. We see the foot cut off. Mr Bridewell faints.
Unable to be looked after at home, Mr Bridewell is sent to the seaside.
Instead of a lovely scene of recuperation at the seaside, we see a bandaged Mr Bridewell through a barred window.
An institution.
At this time, the seaside referred to a way of taking disabled people from the family home and putting them in institutions. Mr Bridewell looks sorrowfully out of the barred window, slowly shaking his head.
The end.
Appears as we see Mr Bridewell at the window, and the photograph of his hopeful, younger self appears next to the title.
The cast.
Mr Bridewell as Joseph Jackson.
Mrs Bridewell as Catherine Mayer.
Miss Bridewell, Beatty Sinclair. Other Miss Bridewell, Astrid Ratcliffe.
Shopkeeper, Matthew Talbot. Customer stroke nurse, Ruth Caudle.
Nurse, Georgia Ty.
Researched and written by the cast. Filmed and edited by Tim Edwards. Produced by Fiona Muller. Directed by Tim Edwards and Fiona Muller. The film was funded by the National Lottery and Equal Lives and filmed at the Bridewell Museum in Norwich. We then see and hear from the players. Catherine researched the story and tells us about her findings.
What was interesting in the First World War is that disabled people were treated not very nice. They were put in an orphanage, or a lot of them were orphaned by parents because they've been killed. But now, there's a lot more facilities for disabled people, and a lot more disabled people can be able to lead their own lives, where before they were imprisoned in an orphanage.
The whole cast gather to shout. The audio description was carried out by Julie Parker,
Georgia Ty.
Catherine Mayer.
Jade Snowden.
As Joseph Jackson.